Hello, everyone. You're listening to the 805 Uncensored. We are a show on the Anti Capitalist Podcast Network hosted by three leftists myself, Heather, and Cami. This podcast covers a variety of topics from music to politics, news, philosophy, and more. There are no limits, which is why we are uncensored. So, welcome, and please follow us on your podcast and social media platforms of choice. This is another panel edition of the 805 Uncensored. This is panel number 16. This is an Indigenous panel, so we're really excited to be doing this with a number of Indigenous speakers. So the way that we'll start off by doing this is I will just call on each one of you and then just give a brief introduction of yourself. You can talk about your background, which Indigenous nation you belong to, and anything else you'd like to share. So we'll start with Amanda first.
Hi, good day, everyone. Halito. My name is Amanda Stubbits. I use she, they pronouns. I am Choctaw Nation of Oklahoma from my mom's side. I'm mixed native, so I'm a mutt. I'm also German and Scottish. I'm really excited to be here, hear what everyone has to say, and have good, positive discussions. I do a lot of work here in the Northwest. I'm in a I throw a lot of events and do a lot with our communities to promote the landback movement, as well as you know art through unity. Yeah.
Wonderful, thank you. Up next is Simona Bearcub.
Hi, everyone. My name's Simona Bearcub, and I'm an Afro-Indigenous resistor. I'm Nakota, Dakota, and Mono Nations. I don't know, I can't even tell you where I'm from. I'm from everywhere. I'm a former trafficking survivor of the foster care system. Nice to meet everyone.
Yeah, thank you for being here. Up next is Mama Jules.
Hi, good evening, everyone. My name is Julie Richards. I'm Oglala Lakota. I reside on Lakota territory in so-called South Dakota. I'm the founder of the Mothers Against Meth Alliance, which is a grassroots program I started 11 years ago. And I don't know, I guess I'm a land defender, water protector, take on pipelines. That's about it.
Thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Up next is Tala Tusis. Tala Tusis. I probably am not saying this right.
No, that's Tala Tatusis.
Tala. Gotcha.
Yeah, that's okay. Hi, everybody. That's it. And hello, my name is Tala Tatusis. We have the Venusko and Itagasun, Sturgeon Lake, Otsinia, Treaty 6 territory. I am Plains Cree, Nakota, and Haudenosaunee, Kanigahaga, Bear Clan of the Akwesasne Longhouse. I am a mental health therapist and advocate for sexual assault survivors, founder of the Cook 'em Scarf campaign, and social worker, writer, designer, a few other things, but really excited to be here and really honored.
Yeah, thank you so much for being here to share your perspective. Are you guys ready to dive into the conversation then?
Let's do it.
Perfect. So, my first question for the panel is we'll just kind of start with the basics. Can you please explain to our listeners what decolonization is and how you see decolonization playing out in communities today? And how does it look like in practice? Oh, I am so sorry. I skipped Bearcat.
Come on now.
Disregard my question.
It's all right. It's all right. Hey. It's Jenn Bearcat. I'm Newe-Numa. That means Shoshone-Paiute from Northern Nevada, from the Duck Valley Indian Reservation. And I currently reside down here in Albuquerque, New Mexico. I've been here for a lot of years. And so this is where basically my home is at. I'm an autonomous, I guess we could call it a resistor. I do a lot of different things. And yeah, I'm really happy to be here with you guys. I'm really glad to hear some familiar voices. It's very good to be back in the circle again. And I just hope that we can have some good words tonight and do some good work. Thanks for inviting us.
Thank you. Appreciate you. Okay. So I think I got everyone now. So we'll start with the basics. Can you please explain what decolonization is, how you see decolonization playing out in communities today, and how it looks in practice? Whoever wants to take that one first. Simona, go ahead.
Well, decolonization is the process of dismantling colonial systems, mindsets, and power structures that continue to oppress our people, right? It's not a metaphor. It's not a virtue signal you just throw in the little group chat for a good deed done one time. It's not symbolic, but it is material, and it requires returning the land.
Comments on that, Amanda?
Yeah, I really think this is a question that could, we could have this conversation all night probably, because I feel like there's so many arms in different directions and so many expansive answers to this, because it's a whole process, and the process can't be done just through one avenue. It's kind of a series, of things that need to be done. But overall, to kind of talk about it, it can include, the landback movement. It includes revitalization of our languages and culture, decolonizing education. When we're talking about economic justice, political sovereignty, food sovereignty. I mean, it really expands out to every aspect of our lives. And I feel like decolonization is an action word because it's something that is continuous and ongoing. And to kind of repeat a little bit of what Simona said, but it's something that doesn't end, right? It's work that is continuously being done. So, yeah.
Well said. Up next is Bearcat, and then Mama Jules.
All right, so I'm not gonna say this in a disrespectful way to any of the other speakers here, because we're all working through our own stuff at our own pace and on our own projects. But I've been looking into a lot of this, and for myself personally, the term decolonial is a huge turnoff. It brings to mind what are they calling? Just a bunch of kind of what I would call diet colonization, because so much has been taken from the word and has been co-opted so heartily by people within the system. So I'm talking about the Deb Hollins, and I'm talking about land acknowledgements, that shit. Oh, sorry. Oh no, I can cuss, right? Yeah, and that stuff is not decolonial. That is actually reformist and performative. So I'd like to we have other words now in our vocabularies, because so many people have done so much work. And I'd like to quote the late Cleve Benally when he said, anti-colonial means attack. So there's a difference between decolonial and anti-colonial. And the difference would be decolonial is actively working in spaces outside of the colonial system. So we can't be decolonial. We can't decolonize the system. It's not possible. We can't decolonize wealth. That's within the system. Those things are not decolonial. Decolonial is already working and being within our own systems that worked before colonization came. Now, anti-colonial would be actively pushing back, like a lot of the things that these ladies have said before me. Anti-colonial is a word that doesn't get used enough. And it means that not only are we working on ourselves outside of the system, but we're also pushing back against the system actively every day. Like Simona said, it's an action word. So I'd like to, when I was thinking about it, I was thinking about the orcas. And a lot of the orcas they've been retaking their own spaces in the oceans and stuff, and rematriating, I guess they would call it, but doing their orca thing, right? However, on top of that, things are changing so much in the world, so much that the animals are watching and they're seeing it. And so for some reason now they're seeing that the clock has been ticking. And so now not only are they retaking their migration routes and redoing all their stuff and reclaiming their pods, but now they're attacking yachts. So decolonial would be retaking your migration routes, and anti-colonial would be attacking yachts. So just I think that our vocabulary really needs to be acknowledged.
Wow, I really appreciate that breakdown. That's awesome. Up next is Mama Jules.
Thank you, Jen. That was really awesome. Uh, like for me, uh, being a boarding school survivor, one of the last of the boarding school survivor days, it's really actually relearning what we were told to unlearn, like learning like our culture, our language, our way of life, our connection with the land. And so to me, all of that is like the food sovereignty, like even like being so self-sufficient that we don't even have to depend on anybody but ourselves, and learning to work hard like our ancestors did. Thank you.
Yeah, definitely. So, another question that I have for the panel is, what are some ways that non Indigenous people could actively support the rights of Indigenous peoples? Go ahead, Simona.
Listen to Indigenous voices, center Indigenous knowledge and ways of being, stop taking over our movements, start unpacking in which ways your privilege show up. I mean, it's it seems to be some difficulty with Western society and their way of being to understand that reciprocity is a thing. It's a real thing. And just, I don't know, just being open to learning and not taking over and commodifying everything.
Well fucking said. Bearcat and then Tala.
I think Bearcup hit it on the head. Go ahead, I'll pass it to Paula.
All right, sounds good.
Oh my God, you guys are so smart. I just love this conversation already. It's just so amazing. And this is something that we talked about in university because the university that I go to is an Indigenous university, and they're trying to take back our the way we teach. And one of the things that came up was how do we create like that space of white supremacy being a common conversation in the systems that we perpetuate, that we deliver, that we implement into our communities as decolonization. And when we're doing that, that's not even our job. And so for something that we didn't do to ourselves, that is something that they are responsible for. That is not our job. That is the what we say, Munia, Wasichu, Shaganash. That's their job. Their job is to educate what white supremacy is, how they perpetuate it, how they constantly deliver it on a day-to-day basis, how they can call each other out, because they know what they're doing and they know how they do it. It's something they were raised to do. It's ingrained in them. They're wired neurologically to be supremacists. And it's taught to us, even in our own communities, the way we are adult supremacists to our children. Our family dynamics have been affected by, all of this colonization. And so when it comes to asking, how do we create awareness of asking non-Native people, white people, to know how to be good allies or how to create space for them to be a part of what it is we're doing, they have to start to dismantle what they've done. That is their responsibility.
Go ahead, Amanda.
I'm loving these answers. I just wanted to kind of add to that because I completely agree with everyone. And in addition to that, taking responsibility for their own education, learn about the land that they're on, learn about the history of the tribal communities, indigenous communities nearby, learn about even down to you know what you're supporting or how you're spending your money or how you're voting or what plants you're choosing for your own yard, being open-minded to other ways of doing things and just knowing when to quite honestly, just knowing when to shut up. Just shut up and listen and learn without pushing back on the ideas that you've grown up with, right? Because it's okay to learn something different, and that's something that I've experienced a lot with people outside of our communities is they really have a hard time kind of unlearning what they know and just listening. So a lot of times when we have these conversations and we talk, people push back you know, with their own, and that's another form of, oppression and supremacy right there. It's just not listening, right? So learning to listen, and not just listening with your ears, but listening with your heart, and like really truly understanding and getting to know our communities.
I think what you're talking about a lot, I hear it called like whataboutisms. They come up with a lot of whataboutisms. So what about this? What about that? And that's disrespectful as fuck right there. Um, Another thing I'd like to note here is you don't have to be white to be a colonizer. Colonization is an action, and anybody can do it. And you need to keep in mind, just because you are not white, and I'm coming from a place where the so-called Southwest America, where there's a lot of people that are Hispanic, um, but they are the majority here. Brown people are the majority here, and a lot of them act as they are white. They vote as they are white. They think that they are white because they are the majority here. However, they don't seem to understand that they are still brown, and they will still get shot by the police, like just like any of the rest of us brown folks. And just because you are not white does not mean you are not a settler.
I think that's such a great point that no matter who you are, you can uphold systems of white supremacy. The next speaker was Tala and then Simona.
I just wanted to add to what was said earlier about um, this article I read in school, and it was really hard to read because it was about Aboriginal social workers and non-Aboriginal social workers in Australia, and it was this constant narrative where they were asking, why are you asking me how it's hard in the system when it's hard for the indigenous population because of what they've experienced? And then on the side there was conversation where they would say, but at the same time, we are struggling with grief and with shame and guilt, and at the same time we feel like we're not responsible for what our ancestors did. At the end of the article, it basically said, as part of the process of learning to work with our people, you have to be okay with knowing, just being a settler, you are living off the privilege of colonization. And you have to accept that as part of working with people. You don't have to take it personally, but you have to know that you are still benefiting from all of that privilege and entitlement. And even in working with non-native people, it sets up a precedent of authority that you don't even have to say anything. You don't even have to be mean or, in any way colonial. You can try to be the nicest person. You're still implementing that colonial structure by being a non-native person in a native space. That in itself is violent to us. And that is something that we talked about after we read the article as a class, where we said, it doesn't matter if you don't feel like it was your fault. It doesn't matter if you feel guilty. It doesn't matter if you feel like you're doing the best you can to help. You still have to acknowledge that it happened. Acknowledgement is part of validation of violence. And that is a really important thing about healing.
And I wanted to add that allyship is a continuous commitment, not just a one-time event, right? To me, allyship is not something you can self-identify as. It's a title that is given and it's earned.
Amanda?
That is that is the absolute truth. That's kind of what I was just gonna say. It's also about building relationships, not just like, oh, I have that one native friend and they said this, right? like really having authentic relationships, without tokenizing, and again, going back to that, just listening and being open-hearted and open-minded, and building those relationships, not just, oh, I went to this event and this is what I heard, um, but doing the real work, you know.
Yeah. Does the panel have any other comments on that question before I move on to the next one?
Nope.
Perfect. So next question is, what does the term pretendian mean, and how has it affected resistance? Go for it, Bearcat.
Actually, I'd like to hear what Mama Jules has to say first.
Yeah, I think Mama Jules, I think you have the emoji mixed up with the hand raised one.
Oh, sure. Let's go to Mama
Oh,
Jules.
sorry about that. So, a pretendian, I've had experience with one that took resources from my community. A pretendian is a person that pretends to be indigenous, right? Um, there's red flags when they claim to be several different tribes, which this one that I thought was my sister. I really thought she was indigenous. She was in so many indigenous communities. She was everyone really loved her. And that's what they do. They use their money to come into our communities that have little to no resources. And at that time, I was like, really had my heart, mind, and spirit set on building this healing center for the meth addicts on my reservation. And I told her about it. So we teamed up. I was actually living on her land with her out in New Mexico. She wrote a bunch of grants. She ended up kicking all the indigenous folks off her land after she had written all these grants, and she kept all the money that came in. And so my conversation with her was like, how could, like, Pine Ridge is the second poorest county in all of Turtle Island, and you're gonna come in and take over $20,000 from my community? Like, I could have already been set up. And she just did. She won't take accountability for it. So another one of the indigenous girls went to that Indians.com. I thought it was a baseball team myself. I didn't even know what that Indians.com was, but I don't know what came of that. They said Jacqueline Keeler, so I just kind of stepped back, like I don't want nothing to do with that. But like, um, what they do is manipulate. They manipulate everybody. They come in as almost like a savior to us in in our times of need. And what they do is take all these resources from the communities, and us folks who are literally moccasins on the ground doing the work every single day 24/7, like we're still out here having to fundraise for everything we do. When they get these 501(c)(3)s, they write grants all day long using our communities, using the statistics from our communities to get these monies and basically make themselves rich. And that's my experience with the pretendian. Thank you.
Fucking disgusting. Thank you so much for sharing that. Um, Anybody have responses to Mama Jules? Yes,
Yeah.
go for it,
Oh,
Amanda.
sorry.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that story. It's really disgusting, and unfortunately, it happens in many of our communities. There's whole fake tribes out there that are trying to get federally recognized as well, that have no ancestry at all. or connection, which is absolutely wild. But it's there, and I think I want to just kind of bring up a few points as well of the damage that it does to our communities. Because when people come in that way and coming in a bad way and lying about who they are, it perpetuates we're the only community that has to prove who we are, right? And has to let me see your paperwork. Oh, nobody says I'm German. Oh, who's your family? Do you have paperwork to prove that, right? And the only other, it's dogs and horses, right? We're like a pedigree. And so when pretendians come and they lie and they, do all of these things, that really perpetuates that paranoia in communities, and protecting or having to protect our communities, and that mistrust, and just does further damage all the way around. There are tribal nations out there that are not federally recognized, and people who really are indigenous that can't obtain their cards and their paperwork. And so it really just does a lot of damage, and creates a lot of conflict even within our own communities, that it just continues to perpetuate, beyond diverting resources. It also causes a whole plethora of issues, of undermining trust within our own communities. It also takes away from our authentic stories. They're misrepresenting, and maybe misrepresenting our issues, and our stories and who we are, and it just is very disruptive to who we are as peoples.
I think that the whole horses and dogs argument is really telling, but also I think that maybe we need to be aware that undocumented people also go through the same thing, where paperwork is a thing. They're also dehumanized in the same type of way. Um, but I think that maybe some people listening right now might not understand why anybody would even do that. Like, why would anybody pretend to be Native? The thing is that there's a lot of grants out there. There's a ton, billions of dollars of grant money that goes out. Also, fulfilling the United States fulfilling their uh, obligations to their contracts with each tribe is that we have healthcare and school. But normally in America, I'm speaking for, you have to definitely put down your tribal enrollment number. You have to, you have to prove that you're actually Native. So a lot of times they can't really steal a lot of that kind of our money, but also, like, when you're getting up into the upper echelon where we're talking about professors, I guess they don't screen them. People could just go in there and say they're Native, and now they're running a whole Native studies program, which sucks because now we have to learn about Native studies from white people, which, super colonized. That differs, I believe, up in Canada, though. I think Canadians have a much more relevant take on how pretendians are very predatory to their spaces. Other than that, like, how I personally have experienced pretendianism is they will come into our camp spaces. When I'm talking about camp, I'm talking about resistance spaces, where people have come in under false identities, and they have come in to also do the same thing, suck at our resources and tap into our networks, and also they're involved with the federal government and or the state governments, and to kind of infiltrate to get us arrested and taken down. And that's a huge threat to us also. So being able to tell people who you are and where you're from, and have people be able to check on that and check who your relatives are and have them vouch for you, that's a big thing. And that's something that we need to normalize a lot more, because a lot of times people will be like, oh, feel all like put out about it. No, that's how we do. That's how we've always done. It's always been a Native thing to do that.
Really well said. Thank you for sharing all that. Um, does anybody have any other comments on that question before we move on to the next set?
I do. I'd like to give it from another perspective.
Sure.
I've always gone around saying I'm a reconnecting Native, because I was removed from my reservation into foster care. And I was taught within the past, I don't know, 5, 7 years, to stop saying that, because that has been co-opted. It's been used now for non-Indigenous folks, for pretendians. Oh, I'm reconnecting. And it really creates a hardship for those of us who really are reconnecting. I've been enrolled since birth. I was in the foster care system dealing with ICWA and all the things. I I know who my people are. My people know who I am. So what do I say now? How do I, what is the proper language I would use heading forward, that I'm trying to reconnect with my heritage, my people? And all I have is, luckily, I had people in Oregon tribes that taught me things, and I've had other relatives in other nations that were able to teach me ways, but I've had to put a stop to it in certain educational spaces and be like, no, I'm not your token. Like, they would ask me to do these things. I can't speak for that tribe. I'm not from there. And for some reason, that doesn't click. Tribal protocol just doesn't seem to cross their mind at all. Anyways, that was my perspective on the pretending issue. It has affected me personally.
It reminds me of the way that the mainstream media kind of puts all Latinos into one group as well. You know, like it's just a monolith. Like if you're Cuban, it's the same as being Mexican. Or, you know, if you're from Guatemala, it's the same as being from Nicaragua. It's just, yeah, it's fucking stupid. Any other comments on that question before we move on to the next set? Which, by the way, Cami will be asking.
Okay, I guess no questions. So, first of all, I just wanted to say thank you to everyone here. I'm super excited to hear what y'all have to say. My name is Cami, and I'll be doing some questions. But how does the idea of landback relate to the broader decolonization movement? Whoever wants to answer that. Should I repeat the question or? Oh, Bearcat?
I knew this one was going to kind of trip us up a little bit, but also like it kind of like goes back to that whole when I first spoke about the decolonization versus anti-colonial, and it would be in the anti-colonial space. Land back means land back. That's not a question; it's a statement, and it's also not even a statement. It's being done. Period. It originated up in Canada, well, so-called Canada, and it was a youth movement, and it was a grassroots movement, and that part was co-opted, and it was unfortunately not only co-opted, but it was incorporated by a certain Indigenous org, and they use it to make banners and flags and all this type of bullshit, and get a multi-million-dollar grant from Jeff Bezos, which is completely opposite of the idea of land back. And it's really disappointing how the work that these youth did and how effective it was to be co-opted and nullified by this other corporation. That's my initial thoughts on about the land back movement.
Thank you. Mama Jules?
To me, the land back, what was the question connected with decolonization? I mean, it is really all connected because, like, even here on my reservation, like a lot of our people, their land was either stolen from them through the BIA or they sold it. So by the time it gets to my generation, like we weren't gifted any land, like our family didn't have any land. And so what happens is we have to go and buy our land back from the tribe. And so that's exactly what I did. I bought 2.5 acres, which I'm turning into, like I said, the healing center for meth addicts who are coming out of treatment or who want to be healed. we're making it into a food forest. We're growing gardens. Eventually, I want to get buffalo, and it's all going back to living off the land, which is basically, land back. So as long as we could have our piece of land where, we could never be kicked off it, we could, we could do what we want. Like, and as long as we're, using it to help our people to even prosper, and maybe they'll see like, oh, look at, she's like growing all this food, and maybe, maybe we want to do that. And then pretty soon we just learn to be so self-sufficient. We don't have to depend on no governments. We don't have to depend on no electricity companies from off the reservation that do mass turnoffs right before a winter storm. We could, our people survived for over 500 years of them trying to kill us. Like, we're survivors. We're still here.
I love that answer. Tala?
Yeah, we were talking about this a lot when we have ceremony classes, and sometimes we have classes where we don't do any writing or PowerPoints or nothing, and we just talk about how to implement ceremony into our practice as social workers. And one of the things that have come up is when we talk about land back, what does that even mean to us? Do we understand how to implement that into our practice? And when we're in the communities, how do we like see that as a perspective? And it's been really brought up in many conversations that it's not when we say land back, because I'm from Treaty 6 territory across the medicine line, not in the United States, and what we're talking about a lot of times is we want there to be emphasis when we say land. We're also talking about language. We're talking about when we speak our language that the syllables that we say, the way we pronounce it, our breath, all of that is absolutely connected to the land. The songs that we sing, the way that we pray, the medicines that we need to teach our people about, that we need to harvest every year. When we say land back, it's about that power. In Cree, we say wakotoin. It means like relationship. So that relationship to the land, it's huge because like we come from a people of shapeshifters, and that's like real. It's not mythology. It's real. And that was the connection to the land, right? And being able to call the thunderstorms, being able to be on a beach in northern communities. And we watched a movie in class where they had these men who were hunting, and they could tell the seals were 40 feet away, but they were under the water because they were that connected to the land. So when we're saying land back, we're not just talking about just like specifically just territory. We're also talking about that spirit and that connection, that innermost internal connection that we've always had, and reminding people, go back to the land inside of yourself and be able to like invoke that energy consistently every day, reconnect, relationship over and over, because that energy in itself is really, really powerful.
Thank you so much. That is just so great to hear. And I guess the next question kind of relates to what you were just saying, and it's what is the connection between land and identity for Indigenous peoples, and how does this impact the fight for land rights? Anyone want to take on that question? Should I repeat it?
I'll take it.
Okay.
So what I've been there's a beautiful teacher. Her name is Sylvia McAdam, and she's been doing some amazing work recently, some research on understanding how rape culture has been implemented into our communities, into our ceremonies, into our culture, and into our own mentalities. And one of the biggest things is we were like generationally assaulted by settlers, not only to our land, but with our bodies. And with the inability to understand body autonomy, the inability to say no just for someone to touch my body, that creates an obstacle to understand your relationship to the land and your ability to understand autonomy of the land, sovereignty of the land, and being able to understand consent of the land. When you have a hard time even saying no for your own body, you have a hard time standing up for the land. So a lot of people are immobilized because they themselves have been violated. And so when to even think to even listen to another person's story about healing from being violated sexually is triggering for people. So it's triggering to talk about extraction of resources from the land in any capacity if you have not even addressed that. And that was a part of the plan. That was a huge part of the plan. In Canada, there are actual journals from the Jesuits that came to study our people in the treaty territories. And when they studied us, they said, oh, look at their biggest law is kinship, natural law, biggest kinship law. And they wanted to take that from us. And an ability to take the kinship law from us broke our greatest strength, which was us, our people. And so when we think about our identity, and I think about myself, like even when you think about recovery from addictions, recovery from any sort of violence, any sort of anything not good in your body, you need to be connected. And for Indigenous people, connection is the land. It's our culture. It's our songs. It's our language. It's our smudges. It's the ability to call yourself to yourself, your name that you are called by, your people that you know. Even just being in the same room with Indigenous people is healing. I can't go somewhere in a room full of non-Native people and not feel some sort of violence. It's really uncomfortable. And it's something we share. Like, you don't even have to know. You just see a Native person in the room. You're like, oh, hey, oh my God, hi. That's just needed, because that's how big our identity is, our community, the idea of community. Like, it's so big for us. So when it comes to land and identity, they're so connected to each other, because like, even when you think about territorial, when it comes to like, as a designer, when I studied designing for myself with ribbon skirts, our florals are connected to the territories that we come from. The animals that we design, they're connected to the territories that we come from. And so it's all so connected universally, but not universally. Like, and I know you know what that means, but when it comes to identity, it's so big when it comes to the land. Like, our animals, our clans, our medicines, they're all territorial, right? So when it comes to being in your own territory where your bloodline comes from, that in itself is healing.
I love that answer. Really well said. Anyone else want to reply to that, or should I move on? Okay, I guess my last question is, how can Indigenous knowledge systems help address environmental issues and climate change? Anyone want to take on that question? Okay, Bearcat.
I think a lot of people don't understand that what Indigenous knowledge or Indigenous wisdom is, and they think it's some kind of mystical kind of crystal ball kind of shit. Like, which, I mean, maybe it is for some people, not for me. But basically, all it is we recognize patterns. Our people recognize patterns, and the way that we recognize these patterns is that we have an oral history, and this spans over thousands of years. It's not just some, settlers have been here for 500 some years or some odd years, so they've only been able to witness how things work for the past 500 years. There's a lot of changes and things that happen, especially when you're interacting with the land, and the way they're interacting with the land is obviously not good. But we've been here for tens of thousands of years, and we've noted all these different changes, and that's how we move. We take all Indigenous wisdom is the best, what they would call the best practices of a certain region. And for the people that are from that region, of course they would know. They would know best. I don't know why you wouldn't take their opinion over anything else.
Definitely, I agree. Anyone else want to add to that? Okay. Well, thank you so much for answering all of my questions. I guess Heather is gonna ask a few more questions next.
I just want to say I'm sorry I couldn't continue with the questions. Stella made me cry, okay?
Oh, yeah, I'm getting chills like every minute over here because you guys are just so great.
Same. I had a few notes and I'm like, man, you guys said it so much better.
So can you guys hear me okay?
Yeah.
Great. So,
Yep.
yeah, I want to echo everybody. Thank you so much for being here. This has already been such a learning experience for me, especially. I wanted to start off with how are Indigenous communities working to revitalize and preserve language, tradition, cultural practices? And then, if anybody wants to also extrapolate more just on the power of language and how Westerners have weaponized it against indigenous populations. Did anybody want to kick us off there?
Not everybody all at once.
Tala.
So currently in our Masters of Indigenous Social Work program at Blue Quills University, we are required to have 4 songs and that we are required to begin a song bundle. It is really difficult because I went to a university for my bachelor's where we didn't focus on ceremony, we focused on learning decolonization, which is completely different. But now it's really beautiful because we have to, every class, someone has to pray in our own language. And some of us come from different nations in my class. Everybody has to learn how to pray, do an opening prayer, and then someone has to sing. And we have to bring our rattles to class. And in singing, we have to, it's really hard. Oh God, it makes me emotional because, it's ingrained in us. We're wired to be ashamed to practice our culture in front of each other. So it's hard to sing my songs, my language, because there's so much violence ingrained in us towards each other. That assimilation is really strong, but we're trying our best and we are learning how to introduce ourselves. Like the way I introduce myself all the time is to say danse and hello, like in Cree, and then we have Newe-Numa. That's my Cree name. Newe is what I am called, which means connected to my belly button. I learned that in my master's class. Tawalinas Yungats, that's my Mohawk name, and that is Yungats is where I am from, like what I am referred to, who I am called. Sorry, my son is running around. So that's part of what we're being asked right now to learn about ourselves. And they said just keep going to the ceremonies, go to sweat, and up here we could do sweats, and when we go to sweats, we're asked to bring tobacco, and we ask when we go in, they tell us, call your grandmas, call your grandpas, and tell them to throw songs at you. And so we have to catch songs from our ancestors and sweat. And it's really beautiful because it's happened where they do that, where they all of a sudden they'll come and they'll give us a song that way. So that's something that we're trying right now, and it's hard, but it's it's a really beautiful thing.
Mama Jules.
I think it's really important to bring in like the language, everything, because like our people weren't even allowed to practice until after 1978 legally, without being prosecuted for it. And also, I feel like it's part of even breaking our generational curses, our generational traumas. Like I said, everything that was stripped from us, now we have to relearn it. But then we get to relearn it with our children and our grandchildren. And like I said, coming from boarding school, I didn't know anything either. I had to like basically relearn who I was, or actually learn who I was all over again as a Lakota woman, instead of that Catholic boarding school student. So I think it's all really important. It's all really connected, and so yeah, I think we're the caretakers of the land, and along with that, like Tala said, the language, the traditions, the cultures, all of that. Thank you.
Thank you. Amanda.
Yeah, I just want to kind of bring up for people who may not fully understand I think when we're having these conversations, it's important for people to realize that our ancestors, like our languages, were beat out of us, and our ancestors were not allowed to speak the language. And so when we're talking about revitalizing language, it's not because we forgot. And so there's a lot of trauma that comes around that, and a lot of healing that comes around that. And language is so important because it reconnects us. It reconnects us, like those before me just said, to our songs, to our spiritualities, to our stories. And it's been really interesting to see, especially these last years, a lot of tribal nations coming with language programs, with classes, also using online and social media to try and do better outreach with their tribal members and make our language learning more accessible, which is really beautiful. So even like utilizing these colonial systems, right? And like, hey, thanks, we're going to decolonize through it. We're going to use these tools. So it's kind of amazing seeing that, but I also see a lot of struggle with our young ones and getting them interested. They want to be fast in this world, and they see what's on the media and what's on TV, and our languages are not represented. So why would they want to learn? How will they use them, right? So I'm seeing a lot of campaigns trying to really stress the importance of that, and it's been really beautiful to see more of our community represented through the media lately, through television, and having more of these conversations, because this representation is important, and I think it's important to get the youth understanding how beautiful it is and how important it is to keep it going, because if our youth aren't learning, then there's not going to be anyone to pass it on to their children and their children's children. So we need to just keep trying and get our people interested.
I think Bearcat and then Simona.
Yeah, just a second what Amanda just said about using social media. We use our tools. This is who we are as Native people, Indigenous people, is we do the best practices, basically what we said before, but also like when I mentioned before about decolonizing and anti-colony, just because we're working outside the system doesn't mean we're not going to use the tools that we have in front of us. That's what our people do. And I love that you mentioned that about reaching the youth and stuff, because that was really so important.
And Simona?
I wanted to talk about the last part of your question, and it's all the way I see it is about us reclaiming our narratives. Our narrative has been told through a colonial lens. Look at Disney. I mean, it's been told as a way to control us and to tell stories that weren't true, like pretendians, like we were talking about earlier. Also, it's also been used, it's been weaponized against us. Like you see what's going on in Palestine, correct? So over there, they're talking about, oh, well, they got hostages and we got prisoners. No, you're on their land. You're on their land. I'm sorry. Those are prisoners that you have. They have the hostages. And so people need to start really looking at who's telling the narrative and what is the context and what is behind the narrative. And so I think language is important, especially in that aspect, because we need to be very careful of the things that we say. Otherwise, we're perpetuating, we're perpetuating our own oppression.
Did we want to let Mariana, who just joined, introduce herself really quickly?
Yeah, Marianne, do you want to introduce yourself to the listeners?
Haku Kianti Kakti Marianne Alapkashwa. Hello, my name is Marianne. I apologize for being late, but my 94-year-old grandmother had a fall, and so I was helping with that, and it was an intense day.
Thank you for being here. I'm sorry to hear that.
Yeah, it's always something. But I'm glad that we still have her. But it's almost like having a toddler, right? You always have to keep your eye on them because they move quickly. Yeah, she seems like she's doing okay for the most part. And I'm the one that has medical training in my family. So for my parents, they kind of panic and stand there, and I'm like, oh my goodness, jumping into action. And um, but yeah, she seems to be doing well. She's talking. She ate, so hopefully everything goes smoothly. But we didn't have to take her to the hospital, but we're still calling the doctor on Monday to have her checked out. So I apologize for being late because I really wanted to get on this, and it sounds like you guys are really talking about a lot of interesting things. And I missed the pretendian part, but it's okay. We'll have to do another one later on about that.
Go for it, Heather.
Sorry, my mic wouldn't unmute. I'm so sorry. This isn't a question on there, but I think it was Tala mentioned sweats. And I was wondering if you could actually share with us a little bit more about those, because that's actually a personal request. Because I recently read a book that was centered around, I mean, it was a fiction, but it was centered around some Native people, Indigenous people that were going through a sweat. And it unlocked all of this, a whole entire book. And I just would love to hear a little bit more about the practice and what it is you do and the goals and how, like, how it connects to your culture. Yes, Mama Jules.
So the sweat lodge was one of the sacred ceremonies brought to us by Tisawi, the white buffalo calf woman, to the Lakota people. So that we shall remain, and it's a purification ceremony. Um, we it could be a healing ceremony. It just depends on what's going on with the person with a person that's putting it on, I guess. But that's what helped me to sober up, because like 15 years ago I was drunk on the streets of White Plain, Nebraska. And I was up there for a year. I had lost literally everything. Sorry, I got my little tacos on my little granddaughter here. But it was blizzarding one day, and I was so drunk, I kept coming in and out, blacking in and out. I was the only one up there. I remember several people trying to give me a ride home, and I denied it. And eventually I blacked out, and I came to, and I was like on my knees, like screaming, like to gosh, like begging Creator to help me to sober up. And the next morning I woke up and I was at my mom's house. And 2 days later, my uncle, who actually stood up there years ago also, who sobered up through Sweat Lodge, he started coming to get me for Sweat Lodge every Sunday. And so that's what helped me to sober up. So it's a really powerful ceremony.
Wow, thank you so much for sharing that.
Thank you.
So some explanations require protocol, like tobacco, so can't go too deep into it out of respect for our laws. But what I can say is I myself am also a recovering addict of crystal meth, and I use sweats a lot of time in my own recovery, but also because I'm Plains Cree and Nakota, but my mom is Plains Cree, and so my late grandfather was a medicine man, and he helped my mom, who went to 12 foster homes and was in residential school, and she didn't believe in her culture. She didn't believe in ceremony. She wasn't allowed to speak her language anymore. So she was having a hard time because I had pneumonia. I was 4 months old, and she wanted to, and my grandpa too, he was also a Christian of some sort. I wasn't raised with any religion, so I have a hard time deciphering the language. But he was, I believe, a layman, evangelical, I think, layman. And he told my mom, we can help her, but you have to choose to believe in this with your love. Your love is the activator. And that's the faith that will activate the medicine and the prayers and open the doorways for the grandfathers to come and help. So I was 4 months old, and doctors couldn't help me because I was possibly dying. And I actually remember that sweat. I remember the song. I remember the rattle in the drum having a light to it. I remember thinking in very simple terms, like, it's just very hot and I'm very tired. I'm going to go to sleep. So obviously I survived, which is amazing. And years down the road, when I got into crystal meth and I got sober, when I chose to sober up, it was that same man, my late grandpa, Andy Natauhau, who took me to sweat when he said, do you want to get better? And I said, yeah, I want to get better. And my family's all traditional, but I just chose to deal with my trauma with drugs and alcohol. And so when I chose to quit, they took me to sweat and they said, leave it all here. Leave it all here. Cry. Let it all out. And give it to the rocks. Give it to the rocks in the middle. And each lodge is comprised differently. There's different bundle keepers with different teachings for each lodge. We don't have universal teachings like every nation has different teachings. Territories have different teachings. Families have different teachings. Clans have different teachings. So I can't say this is what it looks like and this is how it's done. So I can say my experience. And when it comes to sweat lodges written in books, it's very difficult to kind of explain why they did that and how it was meant to be interpreted, because there's so many differences in our ceremonies. But it did help me, and I continue to go to sweats when I'm needing purification.
Thank you so much for sharing that. It's Amanda and then Bearcat.
Thank you for sharing that. I again just wanted to just kind of apply some context here for our listeners, that when we're talking about language revitalization, when we're talking about our ceremonies, all of these things were weaponized against us and beat out of us. But a lot of people, when they think of that, they think it was so long ago. But um, recently just had an elder pass away, and he would always tell me, he was a road man, and so he led different ceremonies, including sweat and other ceremonies as well that I would go to, and he would always, tell me stories about, when he, not even that long ago, they would do these ceremonies and they would have to have people surrounding the ceremony with guns and with rifles to protect the ceremony, because we weren't even allowed to do them, or they weren't even allowed to do them. Um, and so when we're talking about, our ceremonies and our languages, like, all of these things we could not even do just a generation ago. So it was not that long ago. Um, we still have parents and grandparents that remember these times and that can attest to these stories. And some of our ceremonies, we're still fighting for legal rights to have them, and our medicines and so forth. So when we're having these very intimate conversations, again, just bring context of what this means to us, what it means to us, for us to be able to participate and learn these ceremonies, because our parents and our grandparents had to hide it and protect it, and that's why we still have them. So just kind of bringing in that context, and when we talk about
That's
them,
so
it,
important.
it brings healing.
It's very important to keep it in mind too. Bearcat.
Yeah, I just wanted to acknowledge that um, if it wasn't for Tala, I might not have gotten through a lot of things. After I came back from Standing Rock, I went through a lot of other traumas, and I went through PTSD really, really badly. And one morning I woke up and Spirit told me to make a ribbon skirt. And I didn't know, I didn't have anybody around me to teach how to do that. So I Googled it. I mean, what are you going to do? And I found Tala. And, it's really powerful to hear her story, because if she hadn't gotten her healing, I wouldn't have, I might not be here today. So I'd like to thank her for that.
Thank you so much for sharing that. And I think that back to Jordan's question, I think this highlights just like the importance of preserving your culture and history and the oral tradition, and a lot of us just shutting up and listening to your stories, which we so appreciate. Um, the next question, what are some of your thoughts with current Indigenous resistance to colonialism abroad, such as what we're seeing in New Caledonia and Guam? Anyone?
It's a little tough to pay attention to a lot of the global work that's going on, because
Yeah,
there's
I
so
understand.
many things that are happening right now simultaneously, but also that we are also still going through colonization never ended. The Indian Wars never ended. They're still here. It's still happening. Um, so when we talk about these things, like I don't want you guys to think about us as non-educated or non-interested in the global movements, because we are part of it. It's a lot to also take on.
I hear you. Mama Jules?
Yeah, that part about I don't really know I don't really watch the news either, but anywhere that's throwing down against settler colonialism, against distraction, against anything, I'm all for it, because our time to rise is now. It's been like we're past due, but the thing is we need to come together, and that's the hard part, is getting everybody together on the same page with the same goal, without the ego, without the patriarchy of these men wanting to be the war chiefs all the time. And it's that time, and it's been the women rising lately. It's been all the women rising. So anywhere that's throwing down against these things, I'm all for it.
And that segues perfectly into the next question, which is, can you guys talk a little bit more about Indigenous matriarchal societies and what they look like, as opposed to Western white liberal bourgeoisie, or bourgeois feminism? Mariana, did you want to go?
Yeah, I just wanted to add a little bit to you were saying that, other countries and dealing with, I am totally in support of rebellion. 1,000%. I too have issues sometimes with the labels, right? We in the English language, we have to have so many words to describe meaning, because people just don't understand spirit or don't understand how important these things are. So we have to add a lot of words, we have to add a lot of visuals in order to make them understand how important it is. So I really struggle with labels sometimes, but I think it's so important because, 3 or 4 years ago, I'd been posting a lot about Tigre. We really don't hear that much about it. It's very pushed away, hidden. And I often hear that from, I do a lot of work with different organizations. And a lot of times, some of these organizations are very, um, you know, patriarchal white women who are really trying, but they still don't fully get it. And so a lot of times I hear, well, that's way over there. That has nothing to do with you. Are you Ethiopian? I was like, that is not the point. That has happened to our people uh, hundreds of times throughout colonialism. When the ships first came here, we were friendly, thinking this is somebody who's going to come and visit. What I like in the Shumash language is we don't actually have a word for welcome. People have made up words for it, because people were never meant to stay. They were meant to come here and visit and then go back to where they were supposed to go to, which would have worked out excellently with the Spanish. But to go back to that, right, is we're often seen as it's out of sight, out of mind, not my problem. But it is our problem because it's happened to people. It's continuing to happen to people, and it can very well happen again. It could happen at any time. We have no control over this. We understand this and know this, which is why they have our rights so limited. Um, but Chumash are actually matrilineal communities. But as time has progressed and gone forward, unfortunately, due to drugs, alcohol, and mental health issues, we've lost a great deal of our men. When you go back to missing and murdered Indigenous people, we have an uncle that's been missing over 30 years. He's probably no longer living. We'll probably never actually know what happened to him, but we lose a lot of the men in our family. So now we have risen to be a more of a matriarchal society because the women who are taking the lead, we did hold positions of power in ancestral times. And so now we are coming into full circle, and there was rules about how that worked in ancestral times. And a lot of times people don't want to do the work. They just want to come to the forefront. But if you don't, it's like I always try to relate it to a recipe, right? Some things you can't jump forward on. Some things have to take, it's a process, and there's certain things that need to be added in at certain times. We are so far removed from our village life, home life, being urban, for myself, being an urban Indian, I do have connections to the reservation and try to go back as much as possible. But that huge disconnect, a lot of people weren't raised in their tradition or brought up in their Indian ways. And so we see that with some of the men locally who can be very, aggressive. And that's when it, tying back into that, trying to get people together because we don't all have the same issue. Some of us just want a piece of land to live on. We don't want to build a mansion. We want to be at peace and live off the land and have our rights. Other people will take that, resell it, make money off it, and move forward. And that's not how it's supposed to be. So if you never have those teachings, sometimes you don't always have that in you inherently because you've come so far because of colonization. It's not your fault. However, it is your responsibility to understand and learn your ways. And we need to learn from more than just one elder. We need to learn from a group of our people because that is how ancestral, that's what sets us apart from other people living in our villages with elders council and chief council. There's so many other people, and this system worked for thousands of years. So we need to really hone into who we used to be if we don't understand that, because if you want to be the only one, you will be left out of everything, and that's not the intention. But Chumash had a big system of accountability that we have lost so much of. Like, you don't see people usually on the reservation posting on the reservations page or acting out too much because they know that somebody's going to check them for that. And usually it's rightfully so. It's not anything really unjust. There's just things that we need to follow. And being accountable is so important so we don't harm other people, especially people in our own community. So I can
Bearcat?
talk forever, so I'll leave it at that.
I think Bearcat is next.
Yeah, I'm just blown away by that last statement. That was like, I mean, it sums it up so well. I mean, it really applies to all the topics that we're talking about today. If you're really listening to this podcast on a broadcast, rewind that, re-listen to that, because that's so important. Everything this just said applies to everything. A lot of our people are urban. We're urban now. 70% of our people are urban natives now. But and so now we're facing a whole new thing about the crib board to prison pipeline. And so a lot of our people have a lot of aggression and things like that. So there's a whole nother aspect that we have to deal with. But I think that a lot of people have kind of bought into this whole matriarchal kind of thing as a form of like covering all of us or something, or banking off of our identity. Is very tokenizing, because not all of our tribes function that way. Each of our tribes had their own way of being, and through autonomy, it was all respected because that's how all of our tribes function. We had thousands of tribes here before white men came, and we never had a reason to have a centralized government ever. There's no need for it. And that would be violent and it would be unfair, and that person would be taken out because that's what would have to happen. Unfortunately, they came here and they did their thing, and it was very violent, and that's why we're in the position we are today. So, I mean, undoing it is going to be violent as well. However, a lot of people like to think that colonization is an inherent or an organic thing. It's not. It's a choice, and it is very relatively new here. And so, we don't have to do it. People choose to do it. But as far as the matriarchy, my tribe is much more egalitarian, meaning that men and women had similar jobs. Whoever was best did the job. Like I was saying earlier, like a lot of the native wisdom or indigenous wisdom, as people like to call it, is common sense. Whoever does it best does it. However it works best does it. And this is how we figured out over thousands of years of like, how does this stuff work out? Well, let's do that. So a lot of it's just common sense. But I think it's kind of a cop out that a lot of people have taken on this whole matriarcha thing, because you know what? Sometimes women are not the best in the position in some decisions. We need the whole community of people to be involved and to be vocal and to be present, and that's how we function. That's the functional part of things. And also, I think that I'm not Canadian. I think that maybe Tala could speak more on this, but I think it's kind of a cop out because it's really disappointing to take on, because their tribes actually, and I only recently learned about this through like Yinta and like Coyote Camp and all these kind of different resistance movements and stuff, that they actually have matriarchs. There are actual roles. These are political people, and but the community is formed around that, and it is an organic being. And a lot of these people, like I hate to say it, in so-called America, like to take on that role, or like to take on and try to replicate that to kind of sell indigeneity, and it's not right. It weakens our movement spaces, and it's very disrespectful to the people that have actual communities that are built off of that.
Tala?
Yeah, I kind of want to roll off of what Jen just said, because like for me, I was raised in Alkuzasne, which is Ganegehage Mohawk, for lack of a better word, territory. And I seen the women having something to say first, and then the men carrying out what they needed to say. And it was very beautiful for me to witness that. They had this teaching where you would never speak so loud that you were sound like you were yelling, but you would never also whisper. You would never hold your nose up to people, but you would also look straight at people. You wouldn't, think of yourself as lower than or anything like that. And I was raised in that as a younger woman. And when I came back into Saskatchewan and Treaty 6 territory, I was really appalled to see a lot of the women were pushed aside in ceremonies. And in many of the political organizations, the women were pushed aside. They were not as acknowledged as leaders and not listened to as much. And as I continued my healing and learning about rape culture and misogyny, I learned about internalized misogyny. And we think about matriarchy. A lot of people have taken, just as Bearcat said, have taken that word and they've made it like a commodity. Like, oh, I'm a matriarch, so you got to listen to what I got to say. And if I say something, then it's truth and it's law, and there's nothing you can do about it because I'm a woman. And I call bullshit on that, because there's so much internalized misogyny. And what internalized misogyny is just a woman hating women for men. And it's this really horrible way to be, because it's like this constant protection and enabling of old boys club, constant protection and enabling of predators and pedophiles and abusers, domestic violence. Like so many of our political leaders, they perpetuate violence in so many aspects and capacities, and nobody says anything because they struggle with misogyny, or as women internalize misogyny. And it happens so often that people will just say, we need to listen to them because they're this leader. And it's like, why are we not dissecting who that person is and where are they coming from, their intentions and their perspective? What kind of lens are they looking at when they're trying to teach us something? Is that something that's beneficial? Because for me, I thought this one woman was so beautiful of a teacher, and I listened to her, and she was my mentor for years, until I spoke against her, until I disagreed with her. And I was just seeing this most horrible feeling. It was terrible. It was very heartbreaking. That whole idea of matriarchy is beautiful if we think about like where we all have a job and we all put in work. When you think about it that way, not where you think about somebody being on a pedestal, because I don't think, like, as I said, we don't have universal teachings. But one of the things that we do that many nations have is that we don't put anybody on pedestals. Nobody is better than anyone in our communities, in our teachings, and with our ceremonial rites and rites of passage and our bundle keepers. No one is better than anyone. And with that idea of matriarchy, what's been happening is people have been using that to weaponize it, to create a platform for themselves, to say what they feel needs to be said, whether it's beneficial to the communities, whether it's beneficial to healing or not. And how does that affect us and impact our communities? Well, we have so many missing and murdered Indigenous women organizations run by people who victim blame, run by people who tell you, well, you shouldn't have been dressed like that. They're run by people who will tell you, well, you asked for it. Well, you're drinking around and you're being a slut, like slut shaming us, actually perpetuating rape culture. When that in itself, even if you go back to, like I said, Sylvia McAdams, skirting around colonialism presentation, she did a journal backdating to Jesuits when they drew pictures of the Cree women in the Plains territories. We were topless. If we want to talk about being traditional, when we think about matriarchy, there is nothing about modesty that is traditional because we were practical. Just as, like Bearcat said earlier, everything was practical. Everything was about putting in work because you had the ability to do so. It had nothing to do with title. And if you earned something, it was because you were kind. It was because you were loving. It was because you helped out and you put in so much work and you still took care of your kids and you were still taking care of yourself and you were wealthy because of that. So when I think about the term matriarchy, I know for myself, my late dad's good friend, Maria Campbell, said to me, don't ever give yourself a title because we're not out here to be recognized. We're out here to put in work. And I always think about that because if somebody credits me, it's not me that you're being like, oh my God, you did good work and I'm really proud of you. Like, cool, thanks. But that's on the backs of my cookums. That's on the backs of my mushums. That's on the back of my mother, the back of the frontline people who helped me in treatment, the elders who said, here, you can have the medicine. I know you just got off meth like a few weeks ago, but we want to help you. Like, that's them too, right? So it's really important when we think about titles and terminology, like language, when we think about that, it's huge because when we're using language, are we using English when we're doing stuff? What is the definition of matriarchy? Where does that come from? Like, we need to really go back to the root of the word when we're talking about stuff, because language in itself also, like I said earlier, how we say it in our breath, that is powerful. And we're igniting things, we're activating things. And we have to think about what we're activating when we're talking about stuff like that, because we don't want our women to be higher than our men. We don't want our men to be higher than our women. We need to heal together in order to move forward, because what they did was conquer and divide, dissect and segregate, right? So we have to find a way to do this where we're holding each other's arms, even with all the violence that we've experienced, even with all this discomfort and uncomfortable conversations. A part of the process is the rage that comes up. Part of the process is the uncomfortable situations of navigating how we do that, because nobody's ever really decolonized because we weren't there when we were colonized. So it's a huge thing to think about. But I really feel like also kind of ick about the word just because of titles and stuff. But I also feel like it's important to reclaim that we all have a place. I think that's what we've been trying to do, and we kind of get caught up in titles and stuff.
Thank you so much for that. And I do just want to highlight, we're moving on to Simona and then Mama Jules and then Amanda, but I want to highlight that in the chat, Mariana commented, we need to admit that women can be toxic as well. And I'd love if you guys could extrapolate that on that a little bit more if you'd like, or continue on. Simona.
I would actually like to talk about the whole matriarch, because I think that came actually into the conversation because that was a question that was posed originally. And I was very dead set on, I am not a white feminist. I can't answer this question because I needed some way to separate myself. So I had told y'all, I'm a matriarch. It was my way to separate my frame work of the way I identify. And it stemmed from I was working DEI at the college, and they had us take the implicit bias test, Harvard's implicit bias test. And after taking mine, it said that I I had I believed that the women should be in the home and with the children. And everybody looked at me and they're like, "Oh my gosh, I thought you were a feminist." And I looked straight at them and I was like, "No, why did you think I'm a feminist? I'm not." And I found that test to be completely culturally incompetent because it didn't take into the account that, you know, women owned their homes. There were men who moved to the villages of the women. And yeah, we took care of our homes. They were our homes. And we nominated the men who were going to lead because we raised them. We saw who was good, who was kind, who shared. And so I use the term in those ways, not as a title to place myself, which I'm so grateful you all had that conversation because I'm learning so much because I'm a reconnecting native. But I try to use the language in the best way that I know how. And that was my way to push back against this white feminist label that they kept trying to stick on me, that I was a feminist. And oh my gosh, I can't believe she thinks that way, you know? Anyways, thank you for listening to that.
Thank you so much, Simona. It also raises another conversation I'd like to have another day about like the value we place on work that women do, but that's for another day. We have Mama Jules, then Amanda, and then Tala again.
So, as a Lakota, we are a matriarchal society. We've always been, but like back then it was practiced different. And Tala, that was really powerful. Thank you for that. Because like sometimes like I go to these resistance camps and then all of a sudden they're like, "Oh, this is Mama Jules, she's one of the matriarchs." And I'm like, "Oh, okay," and but it's you got to put the work in, and I don't like to even be called a leader, nothing like that. I'm just me. I'm just someone who wants to help my people to heal, and get rid of drugs and alcohol in our communities and make our community safe. But also that lateral violence is always there. Like we do have these self-proclaimed matriarchs who use that title to hurt folks, so it's really touchy thing right now. And Tala was like right on point, because like even folks that come on and say, "Oh, I'm a warrior," or "I'm a water protector," and yeah, that's all cool, but who gave you that title of a warrior? We can't just come on and say, "Oh, I'm a warrior," or like "I'm a medicine woman," or "I'm a chief." And a lot of times when those are like red flags, because those are the ones who are doing things from ego, from a place of wanting to make themselves live in a better way than the people. And that's not what it's about. If you want to call yourself a warrior, then everything you do is for the people. You live with the people. You know, it's yeah. You just give everything for the people if you're gonna claim those titles. That's how I feel about it. And the matriarchy part, we did have a really strong matriarchy back then. They did, like, everything was the matriarchs were consulted. Every family had a matriarch, and we still do to this day. But because of colonialism, because of the the Catholicism, all the churches coming in and taking all of our, not all of them, but taken from us in those ways that we forgot how to go about it to this day. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much. Amanda?
Yeah, I just wanted to, and what I hear, everybody here kind of saying, but to add a kind of a visual, what I think about, I mean, there's a few things. So, what I think about when I think about like westernized white feminism and the difference between that and matriarchal systems that many of our, I can't speak, um, particulars, because each nation has different ways, like people were saying, but as like a overhead view, or, without the details, the differences that I see is the white liberal feminism still operates underneath capitalistic frameworks. They're still about individualism and personal empowerment, and they compartmentalize their approaches, right? So they have different movements that are all kind of each these separate things, right? That, different groups will subscribe to different movements and be like, hey, I did it, right? Whereas when I think about like matriarchal systems just in general, the difference that I have learned is it's about more about like collective power and responsibility, and family structures. I kind of think of like feminism and like colonized ways are very like lineal, and it's straight lines moving up, right? So some people are higher and above others, and kind of go up the ladder, and it's about climbing that ladder and who's above who in these status symbols. And when I think about indigenous ways in general, it's more circular, right? And we see how everything relates and everything affects, um, the whole and the whole of the community. We don't compartmentalize each subject or each issue, because we see how each of these issues affects all of the issues, right? And we see the connection there with all of us. So I feel like these are like some of the main differences that I've seen kind of moving through the things that I've learned along the way, and just kind of reflecting on what I'm hearing here in these conversations as well. Is these matriarchal systems aren't about women just being in power. It's about leadership and hearing each other and making decisions on what is best for the whole community, where no one is left out. Um, and it's about that like collective power and responsibilities to each other, and responsibilities to the land, responsibilities to our culture, responsibilities to our youth. We also think of things on terms of like the next 7 generations. I'm sure people have kind of heard that term before, but that's how we make our decisions, is how is this going to affect the collective community, and how is this going to affect our children's children and our children's children's children, and on down the line. And those, all of our decisions are made that way. And so I think when we're talking about these two different systems, it kind of bounces back to, you know decolonizing, right? Because one, form of feminism, or many forms of feminism, still operate under those colonial systems and those mind frames, where I feel like, again, talking about like matriarchal, like indigenous matriarchal societies, uh, don't operate in that realm at all.
Yeah. Sorry, Tala. My mic was stuck.
Yeah, in regards to understanding for myself, I think our conversation is kind of like going towards is like, and I totally agree with Simona, is white feminism and matriarchy in regards to context are completely different. For myself, I know that in my home with my children, it's important for me to know that there are things that we teach with Indigenous traditional parenting, that there are rites of passage that mothers are a part of in the home. And when I'm teaching my daughter to cook ceremony food, getting ready for a feast or a sweat, and I'm teaching her, go put on a skirt, smudge yourself, think good thoughts. If you're not feeling good, go sit down for a second. Don't be thinking all negative. We're getting ready for a ceremony. Everything is important. How you think, how you feel, what kind of music you're listening to. Like that is for me, and we're thinking about the context of matriarchy. But when I'm thinking about feminism, that's more of like, and me and my mother had this conversation that we are not feminists because we don't believe in equality in between men and women and two-spirit people, because everybody has a separate job and everybody has a purpose. And those purposes come in at different times, at different places, in ceremonies and in communities, and the work that we put in. Everybody at some times works more than others at certain times. It doesn't make anybody better than anybody else, but it doesn't mean that any of us are equal either, because we have different responsibilities. And responsibilities don't make you better, but it makes you know that at certain times you're needed more than others. So that's why we can't be equal in regards to white feminism. White feminism also never fought for us. Our Indigenous women were being, what is the word? What is that word? They were illegally and without our consent taking our ability to give birth during this time of
Is
white
it
feminism,
eugenics?
when they were sterilizing us. Yeah, thank you,
She's talking
Bearcat. When
about,
they're
yeah, forced sterilization.
sterilization. And so during the time of white feminism being so-called great, that was happening to us. They weren't advocating for us. They weren't jumping in and, rallying or bringing all of their marches and rah, rah, rah to the hospitals or to our homes and our communities and asking how we are struggling and suffering with that. And it comes to things like those weird spaces. If I went to a feminist conference, even now, not once would you hear Indigenous women being held to a same degree as them in any context of protection, advocacy, or allyship. It's almost all of the time that we always see conferences posted all over social media, and people always say, where are the Indigenous faces? How are you representing mental health and addictions and your domestic violence, and you have no Indigenous faces? You have mental health professionals who you're calling to speak at these conferences on these amazing podcasts and Zooms, but not one of them is Indigenous, when the demographic of people who struggle with mental health, majority are Indigenous people. So it's a huge, huge difference between white feminism and matriarchy, because for us, a lot of times it's us just being able to say, today I didn't die and didn't get raped and I wasn't killed. It's actually at that level. So it's a big deal for us to get up and put on a skirt, to get up and to braid our hair, to wear our beadwork. It's a big deal. And to just go out there and be, what is a visible minority. It's not just a check box. It's how I look. Even my sister, who is white passing, for her to wear a ribbon skirt, she has to experience violence. For her to wear her beaded earrings or to say that she does beadwork, she has to experience violence. Like all of this is really huge when it comes to, we're talking about, am I a feminist? No, the fuck not. I'm not a feminist, because there's so much that needs to be unpacked. If we were to even get to the level of being recognized in regards to our rights and our bodies, there's so much that needs to be unpacked before we even get to that level of being recognized as worthy in the eyes of the settler society.
Thank you for that, Mariana.
I just want to say, yeah, I really feel what everybody is saying, because I feel like in Ventura County, right, especially, but they don't call it Kentucky for nothing. It is very difficult to get your voice across. We have like two people, right, that are Indigenous, somebody who's had a lived experience, has been taught, and then somebody who's just, discovered and started learning 2 or 3 years ago. But in Chumash society, we would never put somebody out there to represent our people or our tribe who is just learning and doesn't really understand these ways, because they haven't had the time to learn and be taught. And that becomes really difficult, because then we have then what we call fence walkers, where they don't want to disrupt the white side, but they're also not willing to stand up fully for indigenous people. And that becomes a problem, because then all people assume that we are supposed to be this vision that they see of, well, this person is reminds me of our white society, so I think I'm going to go with this person. And it's been a real problem for me personally. Last year, Indigenous Peoples Month, we had a city council member record me at a private event, put it on her private social media, and say, like, I don't understand. And I it took a lot. I reached out to her and I said, you didn't have my permission to record me. And she said, well, you didn't talk about A, B, or C. And I said, you as a white woman do not decide what I as an indigenous woman choose to say and what I'm going to say. You've done that our whole history. You need to take a step back. This is not the time for you. I told her, she wouldn't take it down. Finally, 3 or 4 days of other people that I barely knew really getting on her to take it down, she finally removed it. But it goes back to that, like, feminism isn't for us. It wasn't about us. It's always pretty much left us out. White women have fought for their rights and wanted these accolades, but they never wanted that for us, nor did they want to share. There was no kinship, there was no sisterhood. And going back to the sweat question is right. I wasn't alive in the 60s, but I've heard a lot from my aunts and other people. That whole um, time era really honed in. People were hungry for some type of spiritualness, so they really took from all different types of cultures, and they still do. The wellness, and people in Ohio, they're like the biggest offenders of cultural appropriation and the wellness community. They take and they use all of these things, and they said, well, I asked this elder, she gave me permission. It's like, no, you don't just ask one person. And if the greater community, indigenous community, has a problem with this, maybe you should really think about what you're doing. But they make shower curtains, they make postcards, they make things that is so belittling, I feel, to our culture, because they are trying to get their name out there as an artist, their name out there as a poet. I'm never in this lifetime is anybody kind of going to convince me that a white woman is going to understand a Chumash woman and her struggles more than an actual Chumash woman. I don't understand it. It blows my mind when people try to explain this to me, because I'm instantly like, no, like, just don't even stop speaking. We are not, you don't know what I go through. And when we try to tell them what we go through or our experiences, it's uncomfortable. They don't like it. Somebody told me, like, oh, you're very violent. I said, this isn't violence, this is anger. Violence looks very different. I can show you that, although I choose not to go there. But at the bottom line, they always like to say, oh, we're not violent, we'd like to come together and sit and talk about it. But talk is cheap. You need real action, and you can only talk about so much. It's like, if I've asked you not to do these things, please don't do these things. There's no reason for it. That is not your place to do that. But we live in a society. It's never going to be fully equitable or inclusive. It sounds good to them, so they think, oh yeah, we're inclusive. This is great. But it's really not, and they're not the white women are not taking, or even white men, the communities are not taking the time that they need to really sit back and try to learn. And if it's not available in books, because we know our history is far and few written, few paragraphs here and there, they're not reading the truth, so they can't really understand. But then you look at what's happening in Palestine, right? And then they don't want to look at it, they don't want to know about it, because it's so I we always used to joke, positive vibes only, because it's negative. Like, we literally can't be happy, smiling, and positive all the time. We would be insane. So we need to also be real about our feelings, process our feelings, work through our feelings. And I'm a true believer that we can propel that anger and use it as fuel to get us where we need to go. It doesn't have to be angry and violent and just, negative and not getting anything done. You can really use that to propel you and get into those spaces. But we still struggle with that, being a voice, and a voice that people listen to, because they want something that sounds comfortable and reasonable to them, and they don't want anybody to push back at all. But we need to, and we keep pushing back, because we're never going to get to where we need to be if we just sit here idly waiting for these white people, because they'll breadcrumb us for the rest of our eternity. They will never give us anything if we don't truly stand up and fight for it.
Thank you for sharing that.
That was our last question. If does anybody have any final thoughts before we end the show? This has been absolutely fantastic. Like I can't say enough how amazing this conversation has been.
Yeah, I so appreciate it. The opportunity to sit and listen and learn. And I would love it if we could do another one, because I would like to cover more topics about like what we can do about climate change, and a host of other things that I think we can learn on. So yeah, so Bearcat and Tella.
I'd like to say this is probably one of the most fire conversations that I've been involved in probably for the last couple of years. And also, welcome to the the no-fly list, probably. I'm just kidding, but not really. Yeah, I really appreciate y'all having us here. And I really appreciate all the sisters that have joined in this conversation. Yeah, let's keep doing work.
Thank you.
Tella.
So, like what I had said earlier in regards to like white allyship, when it comes to this work that we do, it's really important to always recognize that, like, even for me, like as a mental health therapist, rage is valid. It is so valid. To be angry is a part of the process of healing. It's one of the stages of grief. And some people have not even woken up yet to the fact that we've been harmed and that we're consistently being harmed to this day. Like it's a violent cycle that's perpetuated in our everyday life from just everything. There's just so much stuff that it encompasses. And when we think about it, when we try to unpack that in any capacity in a room full of non-native people, even in a room full of native people, we're faced with, you need to calm down. This you can't get too angry. You can't be too loud. Like there's an analogy of somebody that says that you're going to push somebody against the wall and you can keep pushing them and keep pushing them. Eventually that person's going to push you back. And that is us. That is that valid rage. You need to be able to encourage people and inspire them to fucking push back, because that is the only way that we're going to survive. We've been silenced and taken it on our fucking back for years. And we need to be able to say, you know what? That's enough. That's enough. You're not going to do that. I'm not tolerating it. And I feel like I'm angry. And I'm going to be allowed to be angry until the anger stage is gone. And then I'm probably going to cry. And then I'm going to grieve. And then I'm going to feel thankful that, holy fuck, I know who the fuck I am. Like that is a part of healing. And as a therapist, I say that it's just something that we need to be aware of. Everybody is allowed to be angry. And when people silence us, which society has, and saying, you're just a violent savage, that was a huge part of them trying to silence us. Even just the terminology and the language that they used was trying to say that our rage was not valid. They took literally almost everything from us. And we're not supposed to be mad. We're allowed to be mad, because a huge part of healing is also anger is a blanket emotion for sadness. And when you let go of all of that sadness and you start to grieve, what's underneath that is love. And that is where the biggest part of our authenticity to fight for our land and our language and our people and the future generations, that's where that comes from. And that's what happens to us when we're up on that hill and we're fasting for 4 days. That's what happens to us when we're in Sundance or when we're in Sweat Lodge. That's where we go inside of ourselves. Our authenticity is that truth of feeling happy, feeling loved, feeling safe, feeling protected. And so it's really big when you think about all the stuff we talked about today: white feminism, pretendianism, colonization, assimilation, all of these titles and terms, things we talk about, like all of it is, when we unpack it, there is a huge conversation that needs to follow. And a lot of times, even when we have, like for myself, I get angry that when I'm doing sharing circles, I'm told, you got an hour, Tala. An hour, an hour with some elders who've never shared nothing their entire fucking life. They've never talked to nobody. And you want me to let them unpack fucking colonialism in an hour, they've never seen a therapist. They've never have been validated. That's what our people are struggling with. When it actually gets to the doorway of saying, okay, let's heal, then they're putting these colonial constructs on how we heal. So our violence, it's a part of it. And it's unfortunate for them, but it's a big part of it for us. We need to be allowed to push the fuck back, open that door, kick it down, and say, this is not okay. You have to be able to stand up. And I've been in trouble so many times as a therapist for standing up and saying, that's not okay. I'm not going to participate in that. I'm going to do something different. And if you don't want me here, then I'm not going to help the way I believe we should help. You can go and get a tokenistic therapist yourself. I have had to struggle with trying to find a job because of that. But it's just so hard to tell someone, that's enough. Sorry, time is up. Because it's like been years. You know, my own grandmother is just starting to talk about the abuse she suffered at the hands of my grandpa. As much as I love my grandpa, there's still room. Two things can be true at the same time. My grandfather can still be an abuser and I can still love him for helping me as an elder. My grandma can still be a recovering alcoholic and still be an elder who helped me get sober. Two things can be true at the same time. We have to heal in a way where we understand different lenses. And that's how we reach capacity of healing. And it's so difficult to understand in colonial terms and colonial lenses because they have such a cookie cutter way of thinking. So I feel like I'm so thankful to have been part of this conversation, and it got me all fired up. I'm like all anxious now, and I need to like do some like boxing or something. I don't know. I just feel all crazy inside. My adrenaline's going. But so thank you guys so much for everything that you guys shared. Because fuck it, I feel like fuck, we're smart, man. We're just so damn smart. It feels good.
Thank you so much. Appreciate all of that.
Okay, well, my addition to that is we forget also that the part of the healing is also that and recognizing and being okay with I'm toxic. In this moment, I'm toxic. My anger is not something I can control. And being able to accept community tapping you on the shoulder and being like, hey, you might be spiraling a bit. And those things I welcome in. I have had many people do that to me. And I'm so grateful that they have, that they loved me enough. They cared about me enough to say that. And for some reason, the society makes that a shameful thing for somebody to correct you or to guide you, to love you enough to say that I see you and I see you're hurting and this isn't you, you know, hey, maybe we should take some time out, you know? And I think we should lean into that more and not be ashamed of it and see it as the gift that it is, you know? That's all I had to add to that.
Up next is Bearcat and then Amanda.
We've been talking a lot about decolonization, and I urge you all to maybe actively do this. Don't do dating apps anymore. Go snag in the wild.
What?
I'm sorry, sister.
You know, we had a real deep conversation. We got to finish it up with some laughs. Come on now. Come on now.
I'm going to the grocery store. I'm a hunter and gatherer now. Please, I'll find him there.
Somebody else has their hand. Oh, it's Marianne.
Yeah, I just wanted to say no talking to you, Jordan, Heather, for bringing this together. I know I've been on you for a while, Jordan. You need to do something. You need to talk about this. You need to do that. And I am so glad that everybody else was talking about labels because it's just been something that bothers me. It's hard to fit into a label when, as an Indigenous woman, right, we have so many roles that we don't just subscribe to just one label. And I don't think that that puts value on who we are. We're much bigger than that. So I'm really happy to be a part of this conversation. And like someone else was saying earlier, yeah, we need like a part two because some of this stuff is very deep. It gets really in, the mud of what we deal with almost, daily basis. It can get really ugly sometimes and really need that take that time to get your feet in the water, whether it be the river, whether it be the ocean. Take some deep breaths because this world is violent, and the people that run the world do not love us, but we know that we have the power. We've risen up in the past. I have ancestry to this is the 200th year of the Chumash revolt, where ancestors stood up, fought back, and burned down the mission and took back their freedom to some aspect at that time. But it's the biggest revolt in California history, and we just never hear about it in the indigenous communities. Or I know that we flip flop from indigenous to Indian, but I use Indian a lot when talking to my own people because it does have political and tribal um, understanding that people don't always get outside of that. Obviously, I don't want people outside of our communities to call us Indians, but it's really important. It has implications, and federal government still refers to us as Indians. So there's just a lot of ties, how they tie us to the land, et cetera, et cetera. But again, much deeper, confusing conversations that need to be talked about so people can get a better understanding of it, because it's just so much. They have made it so complicated where we have, certain groups have sovereignty, but we're still dependent on the federal government. So we're stuck, it feels like. But I hope everybody
Absolutely.
has a great night, and thank you again.
Yeah, thank you so much for all the truth that you shared. And thank you so much for everybody that joined the panel. In addition, oh, Amanda, you have your hand up.
That's okay. I just wanted to express my gratitude again to you all for inviting me here. And I just feel extremely humbled and grateful to everyone on this panel and sharing a piece of themselves. I know that's not always easy to have these conversations, and I feel so humbled to hear your words and grateful to be here. Um, so I just wanted to express that. And yeah, thank you again for putting up with me being sick and medicated. um, I hope that this podcast really sits with people who are listening and really motivates folks to do more work and really get busy with it. We're facing a future that is kind of uncertain in this political climate change. And so I think it's important right now for people to educate themselves, because we don't know, where we're going in the future, and it's going to, it may be harder to access the tools that we need and to access our communities. So build your community now. Do educate yourself. Do the work. This should have already been done, right? So the time is now. Thank you.
Thank you. So well said. And feel better, by the way.
Thank you.
Anybody else have anything? All right, I'll take that as a no. As always, the 805 Uncensored is on all the major social media and podcasting platforms. If you have any comments, questions, guest suggestions, go ahead and shoot me an email, 805uncensored@gmail.com, or reach out to me directly on Instagram. Thank you so much for listening. Wherever you're listening in the world, have a good morning, evening, afternoon, and stay safe out there. Free Palestine. The revolution is you. Bye, everyone.